Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another chapter of our class. Today is the beginning of managing effective projects. Also, it is the last unit we'll be covering fully before our midterm exam. So very quickly, a little information on our midterm exam so we can prepare. Your midterm exam will be Monday, October 26th. It will occur during your regular class hours. So in this class, it will be Monday, October 26th, 12 p.m. From 12 p.m. to 12:50 p.m. Now, one thing we're not entirely sure, it will be online in this class. Because some of our students are quarantining, other students are not fully in Korea. Online, I've decided, is the best route to go. Now, it will be, like last semester, our final exam, if you took my class, it will be website based. I will provide further instructions as the time gets closer, but you will be logging into a website and taking the test that way. However, there will be, unlike the final exam, there will be a greatly expanded question base. This exam will cover seven chapters. It will be the 7 chapters we've covered this semester. However, because chapters 1 through 5 were review, they will be covered in brief. Chapters 6 and 7, because they were covered in depth, are the basis of this course, they'll be covered much more intensely. Now, the project base, or the question base, there will be 30 questions for chapters 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Now, what I mean is, in the website base. I will input 30 of my original questions. Each person will only be answering 5 of those questions. You'll be answering 5 out of 30. What that means is there is almost zero chance that you will have a similar test to anyone else. They will be totally randomized. So maybe you will answer questions 1, 17, 22, 6, and 30. The person working with, or another person might answer questions 2, 11, 9. Statistically, it is almost impossible that you'll have the same test as someone else. That's questions or chapters 1 through 5. You'll be answering 5 out of 30 questions. Chapters 6 and 7, there'll be 20 questions each. And it will be 20 out of 50 questions. So again, each question will be randomized in its location. Each answer for that question will be randomized. And the questions taken from the test bank will also be randomized. Everybody who writes this test will have a unique test. It is statistically almost impossible for any test to be the same as another. Every question will be different on every test. Every location of the question will be different. Every answer, A, B, C, or D, will be different. So, to quickly review, you'll have 95 questions. You'll have 95 questions to answer in a total of 50 minutes. What I've done here is to ensure that, remember, this is competitive. You don't need a perfect score, you just need to be better than everyone else. So if you are unable to finish, and I expect very few people to finish, if anyone, then that's okay, because all you have to do is finish more correctly than the next person. Everybody will get 5 bonus points, so it'll be a total of 100 points. And it will be 20% of your final grade. As of right now, this semester is A or B only. If that changes, it's very possible it will change. Okay, we don't know yet. I was very happy with the homework assignments. Homework assignment number 2 will be in general much more difficult. And also your midterm and your final exam will be critically important to your success because of the structure of this semester. All right, so one more time, Monday, October 26th, 12 to 12:50 p.m., website based. It'll be greatly expanded question based. From chapters 1 to 5, you'll have 5 out of 30 questions in the question base. You'll have chapters 6 and 7, you'll answer 20 out of 50. Statistically, it's almost impossible that you'll have a similar test as somebody else. So hoping to work with another person will be impossible. We also don't know. Now, I'm preparing the exam already, so this will be the format. However, we don't know if we will be back in the classroom at that point. If we're back in the classroom, we will still have the same test, but I will be supervising it while it happens. Are there any questions? If you have any questions about our midterm exam, please contact me through Kakao, and I will do our best to answer them. Please also contact me through our group chat, because if I answer a question once, I would prefer not to answer it more than once. All right, this is the basic information. We will get a little more in depth moving on, but we're down to our final couple classes before our midterm exam. So please be aware that it is coming quickly. You'll be responsible for our Zoom lectures, our video lectures, our homework assignment, and the lecture we will undertake next week, which will be a new format. So, moving on, let's talk about managing effective projects. Step one, and this is important, is defining what is a project. Now, the basic idea is interrelated activities with a definite start and end point. Now, what I mean by this is, if you are assigned to a group and you're told that you will be indefinitely working on this side project, there is no end date, that would, by definition, not be a project. A lot of the management techniques that we're going to discuss today are not relevant if we are looking at the definition of, we require starting points and end points. In order to effectively accomplish what we're hoping to do, we require starting and end points. Now, moving on, the important point here is that we're not, and we're going to talk about that now, shortly, but it doesn't always have a singular goal in mind. There can be multiple goals, there can be major and minor goals, but the key is that there is a start and end point, and it generally involves groups or individuals working together to accomplish a task. Now, there are 3 goals of a project. The first goal is that the project should be accomplished on time or earlier. Nobody's upset if you finish early. However, if you're finishing late, that becomes problematic. Number 2, Your project should be accomplished under or at estimated cost. What I mean by this is when any project is defined, when any project is commenced, when the planning process is occurring, we're always setting a budget for that process, or for that project. Our budget is the resources being devoted to the completion of the task. And again, just like with the time, finishing under budget is acceptable. On budget, no problem. But over budget becomes problematic. Not all projects have high priority. If you're on a low priority project and you're finishing above budget, you're at very real risk of having your project canceled, having all of your work being wasted, and disappointing those who were maybe above you or within the organization who were hoping for a successful conclusion of that project. Finally, our third goal we want to meet client expectations. Now, it's very important to not think only of clients as external. Clients can be internal or external. It could be a client asking you to do something for their organization outside of the firm. It could also be someone in the firm requiring you to work on something for the firm's success internally. So once we've defined our goals, we want to finish on time or earlier, on budget or under budget, and we have to meet our client expectations. We understand what a project is. We understand the project goals. Next thing we have to look at is how do we begin setting up our project. So let's look at that. So the first thing we have to do when we're talking about setting up a project, step one is defining the project. And we'll come back into these steps in a little bit. After we define what we're attempting to do, then we want to organize. After we organize in step 3, then we're going to look at planning. Step 4, monitoring. And finally, step 4, monitoring. And finally, step 5, and this is the final kind of making sure that everything's done effectively, is controlling. So when we have a project, our first step is to define what the project is. We organize effectively, we plan to succeed, we monitor as it's being happened, and we control the efforts of those around us. Now, we're going to look at a very brief case study. The reason it's relevant is because it was a large-scale project undertaken between many different people in an organization. That project is the Xbox. Specifically the Xbox 360. Now the reason this is relevant is Xbox was a multi-corporation effort. It involved the efforts of Microsoft. It involved countless subcontractors, manufacturers, designers, collaborators, and it was a very, very intensive project, but it was also very wildly successful. And that's why it's relevant to us. So for those of you who don't know, I assume all of you know what the Xbox 360 is. But if you're unaware, Xbox 360 is a gaming platform. It allows you to play video games on your TV. It is an effort, or it is a project of the Microsoft Corporation, and it was the follow-up project for their initial Xbox project. So their first gaming platform was the Xbox. Their second was the Xbox 360. So, base information. The project was undertaken 4 years after the release of the Xbox, and it generally was composed of 4 phases. The first, design. Okay, the Xbox was a multi-corporation collaborative effort. What I mean by that is there were countless corporations, not individuals, but companies, teams within individual companies, working together to ensure the success or the successful creation of the Xbox 360 gaming system. Now, when we talk about design, what we're talking about is not just the physical design of the project, but what components are going to go into it, what kind of games are going to be played on it, who will be designing those games, when will those games be launched, etc. So it involved both people working with the Microsoft design team, but also corporations that were focused on the actual manufacturer, the suppliers who were going to be making this project. In a project like this, we can't necessarily say, I want this to happen. I want these parts. I want these technical capabilities. Because with cell phones, with televisions, with technology in general, very few companies manufacture the parts that go into their products. So if Microsoft isn't working with their chip designer, their memory designer, manufacturer, their game manufacturers, then all of the best laid plans in the world won't be successful. So when they were designing, it was a multi-corporation collaborative effort. And they had to work very carefully with all members of the team to ensure what they wanted was deliverable. I can want whatever, but if it cannot be done by my suppliers, by those working with me, if they can't design it, it doesn't work. So once they had the design ideas in mind, they then had to analyze the market. The reason for market analysis is this was a huge effort, and it involved thousands upon thousands of people. But before any corporation undertakes a project like that, they generally have to be sure, or at least have a basic idea of how many units they're going to sell. If Microsoft spends hundreds of millions developing the Xbox 360 and they don't sell, that's largely wasted effort. So what they did is they had to conduct a market analysis, and that was not done by the design team, of course, but involved other departments, the accounting department, sales forecasting department, and they went out of the house, they stayed in the firm. Again, so many people working together in a collaboration to best estimate how many units they would sell. So, to do that, they looked at three different companies or three different ideas. To give themselves a basic idea of what this was going to take, they said, well, how many units did we sell of the Xbox? What did the sales pattern look like? How many units did Sony sell of the PlayStation 1? What was the growth of sales over time? When did the project peak? When did sales begin to decline? What were the total sales? What is the average lifetime of the project? The same thing again with the PS2. When was it manufactured? How did the sales growth look? When did it level off? When did it decline? How long did that process take? And finally, what were the total sales? Because if their analysis had found that this isn't a viable project, we know it is because the Xbox 360 succeeded. But if this was not a viable project, then in that situation, why would we carry it out? So this is critically important as well as design. And what they realized is, after looking, they found that typically sales begin quickly. They maximize in year 4, and the average product has a lifetime of 11 years. So they realized that potential existed. Then, after they designed and analyzed, they began developing. So when they started developing, that means they had to start manufacturing. Now, the Xbox 360, while looking essentially the same as the Xbox, was a totally different project. If anybody knows about video game platforms, you realize they do have, as Microsoft found, an 11-year lifespan. So in 11 years, the internal components of the Xbox 360 were totally different from the internal components of the Xbox. In 11 years, computer power had greatly increased, graphical processing had greatly increased. Every aspect of the machine was essentially more advanced. If you have a smartphone, maybe year to year they're similar. But if you look at the iPhone 10 versus the original iPhone, which is approximately an 11-year gap, they're totally different pieces of technology. And that's what we had here. So with development, of course, they were looking to manufacture. And they actually, in their first year, they manufactured in 37 different countries. But they primarily focused on a Chinese manufacturing base. However, that wasn't the real problem. The real problem, because it was a totally new product, was ensuring that each component manufacturer was able to deliver their goods at the specified time period. If we have irregular supply, as we learned in lean systems, then by definition we have waste. And waste is critically harmful to any company. So finally, after they developed, then they launched. Okay, the launch took place, and it was, by any definition, wildly successful. The number one reason they were so successful was because the team worked so well together. The thousands of companies, tens of thousands of employees who went into designing the Xbox 360 worked very successfully together. The team project was managed well, the individual components of the team succeeded well, and what we had as an end final project or product was a video game system that launched a full year before their competitors. The Xbox 360 was directly competing with the PlayStation 3. It launched a full year before the PlayStation 3. That year, and they were essentially competing projects, or competing products. Because they launched a full year before their competition, what they were able to do was completely capture market share for a full year. That was huge. They sold 10 million products 10 million units in year one. Alternatively, the PS3 sold only 4 million units in year one. Now this is a massive win for Xbox, Microsoft and Xbox in general. Because they were able to completely capture the market, they were able to dominate the sales in year one. And once someone adapts one system, and this is true of any video game platform, and we see this again and again, is that if you buy one system, unless you're a die-hard gamer, someone who lives to video game, most people will only buy one system. If you have the next-gen system, the next generation system, available before your competitors, you are guaranteed to dominate that market. And we saw that with the Xbox because of their massive success of the Xbox 360 process. So let's go now and let's go back a little bit to look at setting up a project. Our first step when we launch a new project is defining the scope So our first step is defining the scope of the project or our project objectives. This is important, critically important for one reason, or for many reasons, but specifically it's very important because if we do not work with a goal in mind, it's very difficult to focus on completing that goal. If we are given a vague or unfocused goal, It's very difficult for us, for our team, to reach that goal. If we're not clear on what we want to do, how can we begin doing it? So, the first step is we want to define our major objectives. These are the primary goals that we are going to focus on. These are the necessary project objectives. Oh, where did my pen? What I mean by necessary is these are the goals that without completion, without meeting successfully, we cannot consider the project to be a success. For example, in the Xbox project, if a new a new graphical processing unit was developed, that's a bonus. But if we finish and we are unable to launch the Xbox 360, if that goal has not been met, the project is a failure. Now, looking at a much smaller scale example, let's say I work at Starbucks and I decide that I want a new drink, something fruity, something summery. Good. What I need is a fruity drink, summery drink. Anything else that I develop is a bonus. Let's say I develop a new manufacturing process, or in the course of designing my project, I realize if we do A instead of B, the manufacturing of all fruity summer drinks will be more effective. That's great. But if I don't actually find a new fruity summery drink, the project is a failure. So main project objectives are those that are necessary for a project to be successfully completed. Once we do that, though, we can we can define secondary or tertiary goals. These are the goals that, while not totally critically important to the main objective, still would be helpful to the firm in general, or maybe a department, maybe related projects. These are the secondary goals that are helpful, but not critically important to the success of a project. Finally, one thing to be careful of. we have to be aware of scope leak or project creep. What that means is that when we begin a project, we want to be very clear on what we are trying to do. If we are constantly creeping our goals bigger, if the scope of the project is leaking larger, then it becomes almost impossible to finish on time or earlier. In that scenario, I ask you to do this, your team is working hard, I give you a secondary goal weeks later, it might invalidate the work you've done, it might drain resources from your team that could be used to succeed, or it might also make it impossible for the prior organizational structure to continue working as it was designed. So when we define our project, right here, when we define it, we want to focus on our main critically important goals. Once we've done that, we want to look at any secondary goals that would be beneficial but are not critically important to the success of our team. And finally, we want to define those ideas. We want to be able to make very clear that that is our goal, that and only that. Those goals and only those goals. We don't want project creep to occur. We don't want to revisit our goals unless absolutely necessary. Instead, we begin the project with a clear set of objectives. All right, everyone. That's it for right now. We're going to wrap up this session, and then we'll continue we'll continue next session. I'll see you then. Have a wonderful break time or a couple days. Thank you.